In its nearly 60-year history, Star Trek has seen actors come and go for various reasons. Some arrived, had a look around, said no thank you and left. It happens. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for Trek Culture, and here are 10 times when Star Trek recast its actors. 10. Commander Bruce Maddox. Commander Bruce Maddox is connected to the most important parts of Data's life. Brian Brophy, the original actor, was the man who stood against Data's rights as an individual in The Measure of a Man. More than 30 years later, the role moves to John Ailes. As Maddox had so little screen time in Star Trek The Next Generation, this seems less of a shock to the system. It certainly would have been nice for continuity had Brophy returned to the role, but Ailes conveys in his short scenes a depth that Brophy was never offered the chance to display. In The Next Generation, the character is a comfortable, if frustrated man working on new aspects of his career. In Star Trek Picard, he's a broken individual on the run from the Tal Shiar, kidnapped by thugs looking to sell him to the highest bidder. He's shown to have a relationship with Jurati, to be kind and caring and full of remorse. The character has evolved a lot in the years that have passed. While fans may have been hoping for a bit more time with the character, they now have exactly even number of portrayals to judge their opinions on, and both men brought their own spin on the one man. 9. Zefram Cochrane. Glenn Corbett originated the role of Zefram Cochrane in Star Trek the original series. He was, for want of a better word, very 60s in his portrayal. He played the character as an old man turned young man, saved from certain death by an alien Cloud, the companion, that has fallen in love with him, prolonging his life and providing whatever he needs. Corbett was a bit part actor who portrayed several guest roles in various 60s, 70s and early 80s shows. It is these days a somewhat forgotten performance, one that has fallen into the annals of Star Trek history. He died in 1993 from lung cancer, 3 years before the character returned in Star Trek First Contact. For the film, the role was taken over by James Cromwell, who was himself no stranger to Star Trek. Twice he had guest starred in The Next Generation, playing aliens each time. Here, he returned for his first human role, and it would go on to become his most well-known role in Star Trek. It almost wasn't to be, as the role for the film had been written with Tom Hanks in mind. Hanks, a lifelong Star Trek fan, was unavailable for filming, though has expressed regret for the missed opportunity since. Cromwell's performance as the somewhat drunkard, more comedic version of Cochrane is now the definitive version of the inventor of warp drive. 8. Icheb. This, along with Maddox, springs from an episode 5 of Star Trek Picard, Stardust City Rag. The character appears briefly and serves only one purpose. He dies horribly, forcing 7 of 9 into a life of vigilantism. The character originated on Star Trek Voyager, portrayed by Manu Intiraymi in its 6th season. He is one of the Borg children that Seven cares for, allowing her character to grow in a maternal direction during their time on the ship. Icheb, the oldest of the children, gets the most to do. As a young Borg, he was privy to much of the information from the collective had to offer, and as such he was an ideal candidate for Starfleet Academy. He begins his training on the ship alongside Seven. In time, he effectively becomes her son, demonstrated most strikingly in the episode Child's Play. The truth of his assimilation comes out in that his parents delivered him to the collective to prevent them from being attacked. Seven's anger is clear when she discovers their betrayal and she is able to save him. However, for his final scenes, Icheb is portrayed by Casey King. His death is gruesome as his body is harvested for the Borg implants. It was a shocking beginning to the episode and a shocking end to the character. That she has to euthanize him only serves to embitter Seven further toward his captors. 7. Captain Janeway. Today, Kate Mulgrew is Captain Catherine Janeway. Serving as Star Trek's first leading female captain, she commanded the starship Voyager as it was flung across the galaxy to the Delta Quadrant while in search of a Maquis ship piloted by Chakotay. Voyager's first episode, Caretaker, was a solid pilot, introducing each of the characters to the audience with the traits they would come to be known by. But Kate Mulgrew was not the first actress to play the captain. French-Canadian actress Genevieve Bujold was cast in the role prior to this. She began filming for the pilot, and there are several of her scenes available as extras online. There is a single shot of her surviving in the episode, though admittedly it is one just of her hand. Bujold's stint on the show was brief, a day and a half to be exact, and she quit, citing discomfort with the hectic pace of TV filming. Other rumoured reasons included the producers not being satisfied in what they were seeing. Once Mulgrew was brought in, however, it was immediately obvious that Captain Janeway had finally arrived. 6. Saavik. Lieutenant Saavik was introduced in Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan as a potential replacement for Spock, as Leonard Nimoy had indicated he would only return for the sequel on the proviso that he was killed off. The film opens with Kirstie Alley commanding the Enterprise into the infamous Kobayashi Maru test. The character was written as young and, for a Vulcan, emotional. She swears, damn when she is out of options and the Klingons close in. She lets out an audible gasp later in the film when Scotty arrives carrying the body of his nephew. She sheds a tear for Spock as his coffin is fired into space. She had originally been written with the intention of having Romulan heritage, which would account for the displays of emotion during the film. However, when the character returned for Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, these emotions and this backstory was struck out by director Leonard Nimoy. She became a full-blooded Vulcan, and the emotional outbursts were not touched on again. By the time Star Trek III was filming, Ali had risen in status thanks to her role on the TV show Cheers, and her price had risen accordingly. Robin Curtis was then cast in the role. She would play Saavik for the next 2 films. Her portrayal was a cold counterpart to Ali's, eschewing the humanity of her predecessor for a more straightforward Vulcan. 5. The original series versus the JJ reboot. JJ Abrams very successfully rebooted the Star Trek franchise with his first film in 2009. The characters were back, but they were updated to meet the new age. The curmudgeonly Dr. McCoy was now portrayed by the younger but still gruff Karl Urban. John Cho took over the role of Sulu, Simon Pegg stepped into Scotty's engineering boots, the late Anton Yelchin became Chekhov, and Zoe Saldana was the new Uhura. At the time, the roles had belonged to the original cast for 40 years. DeForest Kelley, George Takei, James Doohan, Walter Koenig, and Nichelle Nichols were these characters. The very idea of seeing someone else in these roles was strange, but thankfully, it worked. Each role is both an homage and a new direction for each character. Yelchin's Chekhov plays up the Russian accent to comedic effects, struggling to be understood by the computer when attempting to key in a command code. Koenig's Chekhov never had such troubles, but then not many would have questioned his accent. At the time, he was setting the standard for what audience knew of the Russians, as he was one of the only depictions in a positive way at the time. John Cho's approach to Sulu was a more confident, yet at the same time more relaxed take on the character. He was eager, but he could carry his own. There's a nod to the famous topless fencing scene from The Naked Time, made infamous by Takei when Cho's Sulu pulls out his sword on the Romulan platform. Simon Pegg, a devout Trekkie, had his dreams come true when he took over for James Doohan. Doohan had sadly passed away before ever hearing of this reboot. Pegg's performance is very much in honour of the man. The first film was full of nods and nostalgia, not to mention that he's given her all she's got. In the sequels, he would expand on the role, allowing a greater depth to the character. Karl Urban's take on McCoy is played to comedic effect as well. He hams up the southern drawl, clearly enjoying himself while mouthing off to the others. McCoy walks with the assurance that he can do and say almost whatever he likes around the Apple Store bridge of the Enterprise. Kelly's McCoy was the original ship's doctor, and it is to his credit that Urban doesn't try to steer too far away from that portrayal. The doctor is in, and his name is Kelly, but Urban can look after you in the meantime. Uhura, as played by Nichelle Nichols, was a groundbreaking character for 60s television. Whoopi Goldberg has gone on record as saying the character inspired her to take up acting, and Nichols often speaks of the time when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stepped in to ensure she didn't quit the show, underlining the importance of her character and the representation that black people were finally getting. In 2009, the character was vastly different. She was confident, like Nichols, but she was written at a time of more freedom, when the fact that she was a black woman was not one of her defining characteristics. Saldana's performance is excellent and fun, enjoying far more time in the spotlight than the original character enjoyed. In contrast, it is easily argued that it is Nichols' performance that paved the way for the freedom of her character in years to come. 4. Captain Kirk. In 1966, William Shatner beamed onto our screens as James R. Kirk, yes, R, captain of the USS Enterprise. In 3 seasons, his Kirk became synonymous with Star Trek. The second pilot of the Star Trek the Original series, Where No Man Has Gone Before, was an almost unprecedented show of faith by the studio after the first pilot, The Cage, had failed to win them over. Kirk was introduced as the rough-and-tumble captain that had not been present in the original pilot. The uniforms were holdovers from The Cage and the characters were still being fleshed out. Spock had undergone the studio changes and Kirk had yet to settle on a middle name. He would later change to James T. Kirk. Shatner's Kirk was both emotional but able to display cool logic. He was constantly in command of the situations around him. He didn't believe in a no-win scenario, but his confidence never strayed toward arrogance. Much has been said about his particular style of delivery, but what is clear is that in the role, Shatner defined what it meant to be a leader. Chris Pine took over the role in 2009 Star Trek. He brought a sense of youth to the character that had been lacking before. He was very clearly the childish and arrogant student that one might expect a young Kirk to be. The pace of the film is breakneck and barely stops for breath, but when it does, Pine shows that his Kirk has the ability to show depth. When he takes the bridge after his fight with Spock, there is a genuine sense of awe. Kirk has arrived in the captain's chair, and it's very believable. 3. Number 1. Majel Barrett was the queen of Star Trek. She appeared in the original series, the animated series, films, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the 2009 film. Her first role on the show was that of Number 1, the first officer to Captain Pike. She portrayed many of the qualities that would later be found in Spock. The cage was a product of its time, while still being futuristic. Pike comments at one point that he can't get used to a woman on the bridge of a starship, to which number one gives him a stare of condemnation. He apologizes. The producers hated it. They demanded that both number one and the satanic fellow with the pointed ears had to go. The satanic fellow did all right, but it would be another 50 years before number one returned. In Star Trek Discovery's second season, the role was taken over by Rebecca Romijn. She retained the coolness that Barrett's character had, but this one came with a new confidence that had been lacking in the original pilot. Her relationship with Pike was different. She was a hardened character, battle-ready, but very much in command. Comparing the two characters is different in a way because the original had so little screen time, yet Barrett herself has been in so much of Trek. It comes down to taste. Discovery delivered a belter of a second season. The cage is a curio, essential for Trek purists, but not essential to understand the show as a whole. The original number one may just be number two to Discovery's Una. 2. Spock. Spock has been played by 3 different main actors. The first is of course Leonard Nimoy. From the beginning, Nimoy's Spock has been the most immediately identifiable character in the Star Trek franchise. His cool logic and delivery of lines with his deep voice was iconic. From the cage up to Star Trek Into Darkness, he was the backbone of the franchise. He was a loyal man, arguing for the rights of his co-stars and engendering a peaceful and fun working environment. The recent documentary For the Love of Spock is a touching and heartfelt tribute to the actor. The character is played by Zachary Quinto in the 2009 reboot. Quinto's performance was both an homage and a subtle new take. Quinto plays him as a Vulcan who is still part human, not having undergone the ceremony to purge all emotion. He meets with disapproval from fellow Vulcans for this, but is commended by his parents. His emotional breakdown at the death of his mother tugs all the right heartstrings. He lets the emotions bubble under the surface, keeping them in check until Kirk finally pushes him. In 2019, the character returned again. Ethan Peck stepped into the role. The first few episodes of the second season teased the arrival of this Spock, but when he finally did make it to the screen, Peck immediately cemented his place in the franchise by again delivering a fresh take on the character. His certainty and his logic endeared him to fans. Much like Quinto's Spock, he was not as far from emotion as Nimoy's early Spock had been, but his directness balanced this. The closing scenes between Burnham and Spock are some of Discovery's best moments. 1. Captain Pike. Christopher Pike was the original captain. Jeffrey Hunter was a movie star when he took on the role. He displayed a brooding man full of regret and loss, dealing with the deaths of several crew members in the recent past. He laments the pressures of command. He's tired of deciding who lives and who dies. When the cage failed to win over producers, the script was rewritten. Hunter, however, decided he did not want to return. He died in 1969. However, his version of the character was reworked into the original series' only 2-part episode, The Menagerie. Here, much of the cage was shown in flashbacks, and Pike, portrayed now as a crippled invalid by Sean Kenny, appeared in heavy makeup in a non-speaking capacity. 2009's Star Trek brought Captain Pike back to the franchise. This was a captain who was in command of his strengths and abilities, and he has no plans on giving up the captaincy of the Enterprise. Bruce Greenwood plays the character with confidence and maturity over the younger Kirk. He holds the room to task when breaking up a bar fight. He gets to work with Kirk in the takedown of Nero's vessel. He's elevated to Admiral and even returns to Star Trek Into Darkness, although his character has a less happy ending than Hunter's version. One of the best elements of Discovery's second season was the introduction of Anson Mount. The quality of his performance cannot be overstated. He dominates the series from start to finish, and he was very much welcomed back in the short Trek episodes, and it is with genuine excitement that we are awaiting the beginning of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And that is everything for our list today. If you reckon we missed anyone, please drop it into the comments below. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and remember that you can catch Trek Culture over on Twitter at Trek Culture. You can catch myself at Sean Ferrick on Twitter as well. Guys, whatever you end up doing till I see you again, make sure you look after yourselves and live long and prosper.